Listen, can you hear that? The whisper of autumn wind through dying leaves. The distant crackle of wood surrendering to flame. Tonight, as October's chill settles over the land and Halloween draws near with its promise of thinning veils, we gather around the eternal flame of human storytelling. I am your host, and welcome to this sanctum of shadows where forgotten terrors wait to be awakened. Before we kindle our fire and begin our journey, let us acknowledge what we are about to explore. The stories that follow represent a careful blend of documented American folklore, historical accounts, and narrative dramatization designed to honor the campfire tradition. Each tale is rooted in authentic cultural legends and recorded witness testimonies, though I will clearly distinguish throughout our evening between established historical facts, documented folklore patterns, and the dramatic elements I have added to enhance our storytelling experience. The academic approach to folklore requires this transparency. While these legends reflect genuine cultural beliefs and documented witness accounts spanning generations, the specific narrative details, dialogue, and some character names have been crafted to serve our educational and entertainment purposes. Where historical documentation exists, I will note it. Where we enter the realm of speculation, cultural interpretation, or dramatic enhancement, I will make that equally clear. The season compels us, does it not? As daylight shortens and darkness claims dominion over more hours than light, something primal stirs within our collective memory. Our ancestors understood this truth, that autumn nights demand stories that acknowledge the mysteries lurking just beyond the fire's protective glow. So settle in, dear listeners. Pour yourself something warm, retrieve that bag of marshmallows, and if fortune has blessed you with a porch or balcony, venture there now. Let the night air carry these words to you as they were meant to be received. Beneath stars that have witnessed countless generations gather to share tales of the inexplicable. Tell me in the comments, where do you find yourself tonight? What hour marks your timepiece as these words reach your ears? Are you tucked safely indoors, or have you braved the autumn darkness to truly embrace this ancient ritual? But first, before we cross the threshold into territories where rational minds fear to tread, grant me this small courtesy. Press that like button. Consider it a talisman against the forces we shall invoke tonight. If you glimpse the notification bell, ring it as well, for these stories must reach other souls who share our fascination with the inexplicable. Each engagement serves as a beacon, drawing kindred spirits to our circle of firelight. Tonight, we shall explore 7 tales that emerged from the American wilderness. Stories that took root in the 19th century as communities gathered around campfires from the Atlantic shores to the Pacific frontier. These are not mere entertainment, but windows into the collective fears and wisdom of a young nation grappling with vast, untamed territories and the supernatural forces that seem to inhabit them. From phantom hitchhikers who haunt lonely highways to weeping spirits that guard cursed bridges. From malevolent entities that prey upon the isolated to vengeful ghosts seeking justice from beyond the grave. These tales have been passed down through generations of campfire circles, growing stronger and more terrifying with each telling. Prepare yourselves for this night. We shall journey through fog-shrouded hollows and moon-bleached crossroads, past abandoned homesteads where tragedy left its mark, and along highways where the dead refused to rest. These are the campfire stories that shaped American folklore. Legends born of genuine terror, nurtured by countless retellings, and preserved because they speak to truths about the human condition that daylight cannot illuminate. If you, like our ancestors, feel drawn to the shadows that dance beyond the fire's reach, subscribe to our channel and join our community of darkness dwellers. Share these stories with those who understand that some truths emerge only in the space between light and shadow, between the known and unknowable. And now, let our journey into America's haunted heart begin. The Vanishing Hitchhiker, Resurrection, Mary of Archer Avenue. In the heartland of America, where the winds of Lake Michigan carry whispers of tragedy across the Illinois plains, stands the most haunted stretch of asphalt in the New World, Archer Avenue, that lonely ribbon of blacktop connecting Chicago's South Side to the suburban cemetery of Resurrection, serves as both roadway and portal, a liminal space where the boundaries between life and death blur like headlights in fog. Picture Chicago in the autumn of 1934. The Great Depression has cast its shadow over the nation, yet young people still seek escape in dance halls and speakeasies. The O. Henry Ballroom blazes with jazz music and desperate gaiety, its patrons determined to find joy despite the economic darkness surrounding them. It is here that our tale begins, with a young woman whose name history has forgotten, but whose presence refuses to fade. She was beautiful by all accounts, blonde hair catching the ballroom's amber light, blue dress flowing like water as she moved across the polished floor. But beauty, as we shall learn, offers no protection against the cruel indifference of fate. The documented account begins with Jerry Pallas, a real Chicago resident whose testimony was recorded by multiple paranormal investigators. On a winter night in 1939, Pallas reported picking up a young blonde woman in a white dress near the Willowbrook Ballroom. His account, verified by researchers and cited in numerous books about Chicago hauntings, describes the woman providing an address, engaging in minimal conversation during the ride, then vanishing near Resurrection Cemetery. While Jerry Pallas was a real person who gave documented testimony about his encounter, we cannot verify the supernatural nature of his experience. What we can confirm is that his account established the pattern for subsequent Resurrection Mary reports and became the foundation for Chicago's most famous ghost story. The most compelling aspect of the Mary legend lies not in any single encounter, but in the consistency of reports across decades. The Chicago Police Department and various paranormal researchers have documented dozens of similar accounts. Drivers picking up a young blonde woman in period clothing, conversations during rides toward Resurrection Cemetery, and sudden disappearances near the cemetery gates. In 1976, passing motorist called police, reporting a young woman trapped behind the cemetery gates. Officers found the gates secure, but discovered what appeared to be handprints pressed into the metal bars from the inside, marks that remained visible for years and were photographed by numerous investigators. While skeptics proposed conventional explanations for these marks, their existence was documented by the Chicago Police Department. These physical traces, the bent iron bars, the handprints in metal, represent tangible evidence that something occurred at Resurrection Cemetery. Whether supernatural or natural causes created these marks remains a matter of interpretation, but their existence is verified by law enforcement documentation and photographic evidence. They buried her in Resurrection Cemetery, that vast necropolis where thousands of Chicago's dead rest beneath marble angels and granite crosses. Her grave, if it can be identified among the countless others, lies somewhere within those hallowed grounds. But Mary's story was far from over. In truth, it was only beginning. The first sighting occurred on a bitter December night in 1939. Jerry Pallas, a young man returning from an evening in the city, spotted a blonde woman in a blue dress walking along Archer Avenue. The temperature had plummeted below freezing, yet she wore no coat, seemed unbothered by the wind that cut through his own heavy overcoat. Moved by compassion, or perhaps by the mysterious pull that draws the living toward the supernatural, Jerry stopped his Buick and offered her a ride. She accepted wordlessly, sliding into the passenger seat with movements that seemed to displace no air, generate no heat. Her skin, when their hands briefly touched, felt like marble in winter. She provided an address, always the same address, as future encounters would reveal. And they drove through the night in silence broken only by the rumble of his engine and the whisper of tires on frost-slick pavement. As they approached the intersection of Archer Avenue and Roberts Road, directly across from Resurrection Cemetery, Mary turned to Jerry with eyes that held depths of sorrow no mortal gaze should contain. "This is where I belong," she whispered, in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. "This is where I must return." Before Jerry could respond, she was gone. Not departed, gone, as if she had never been there at all. The passenger seat bore no impression from her weight. No trace of her presence save the lingering scent of roses and cemetery earth that would haunt Jerry's dreams for decades to come. What followed was a pattern that would repeat countless times over the ensuing decades. Drivers along Archer Avenue would encounter the same beautiful young woman, always wearing the same blue dress, always walking the same stretch of road between the ballroom and the cemetery. Some, like Jerry, offered rides and experienced the same supernatural conclusion. Others reported more disturbing encounters, the sudden appearance of a figure in their headlights, the sickening impact, the desperate search that revealed no body, no evidence of collision save for dents in their vehicles that should not exist. The most chilling accounts came from those who claimed to have danced with Mary at the ballroom itself. Young men would describe meeting a beautiful blonde woman, spending the evening in her company, only to offer her a ride home when the music ended. The dance always concluded the same way, with Mary vanishing at the cemetery gates, leaving behind only the echo of her laughter and the inexplicable certainty that something profound and terrible had just occurred. But Mary's manifestations were not confined to gentle encounters or mysterious disappearances. Cemetery workers at Resurrection began reporting disturbances in the 1970s. Bent iron bars on the cemetery gates, handprints scorched into metal that should not have been touched by any living person. In 1976, a passing motorist called police to report a young woman trapped behind the cemetery gates, apparently locked in after hours. When officers arrived, they found the gates secured as always, but the iron bars were bent outward in a pattern suggesting tremendous force applied from the inside, as if someone of supernatural strength had tried to push their way out. The phenomenon reached national attention in 1978, when taxi driver Ralph contacted Chicago newspapers with his account of picking up a young woman outside the ballroom. She had directed him toward Resurrection Cemetery, conversing normally during the drive, but as they approached the cemetery entrance, she had screamed with such anguish that Ralph's blood turned to ice water in his veins. When he turned to comfort her, she was gone, vanished from a moving vehicle with doors that had never opened. It's important to note that while dozens of similar accounts have been documented, skeptics point to the lack of verifiable evidence and the tendency for urban legends to grow in the telling. However, the consistency of witness descriptions across decades suggests something more than mere suggestion or copycat storytelling. The psychological implications of the Resurrection Mary legend extend far beyond simple ghost story entertainment. She represents the archetype of unfinished business, the soul whose earthly existence ended so abruptly, so unfairly, that death itself could not contain her need to return. Her eternal walk along Archer Avenue serves as metaphor for all the journeys interrupted, all the dances that ended too soon, all the young lives cut short by circumstance beyond their control. Mary also embodies the particularly American fear of the automobile, that mechanical marvel that promised freedom, but delivered death to so many. In a nation defined by its highways and byways, the phantom hitchhiker legend acknowledges the dark price of our mobile society. Every stretch of road that has claimed lives becomes potentially haunted, every accident scene a possible portal for restless spirits. The persistence of Mary's manifestations into the modern era suggests that some truths transcend technological advancement. Despite decades of urban development, despite the installation of streetlights and the increase in traffic, Archer Avenue retains its supernatural charge. Contemporary witnesses continue to report encounters that follow the same pattern established in Jerry Palace's original account. The beautiful young woman, the blue dress, the vanishing at the cemetery gates. What makes Mary's legend particularly compelling is its grounding in recognizable human experience. Unlike the fantastical creatures of older folklores, Mary appears as she lived, a young woman seeking connection, companionship, perhaps simply the completion of her interrupted journey home. Her supernatural nature reveals itself only gradually, through accumulating details that suggest something beyond ordinary experience. The cemetery itself has become a pilgrimage site for paranormal researchers and curiosity seekers. Visitors report sudden temperature drops, unexplained sounds, and the persistent sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Photographs taken at the cemetery sometimes reveal anomalous figures or light patterns that were not visible to the naked eye during exposure. While these phenomena could potentially be explained through natural causes, pareidolia, electromagnetic anomalies, or psychological suggestion, the sheer volume and consistency of reports suggest that Resurrection Cemetery serves as a focal point for experiences that transcend ordinary explanation. Modern urban legend researchers have identified similar phantom hitchhiker stories throughout the United States, each adapted to local circumstances and cultural fears. But Mary remains the most famous, most frequently encountered, most thoroughly documented example of the breed. Her story has inspired films, books, and countless retellings, each adding new details to the legend while preserving the essential truth that some bonds between the living and the dead, between the soul and its earthly attachments, cannot be severed by mere physical dissolution. Tonight, as you travel your own darkened highways, pay attention to lone figures walking along the roadside. Consider the drivers who slow their vehicles, moved by compassion to offer assistance to strangers. Remember that kindness toward the unknown carries risks that extend beyond the merely physical, that some passengers bring with them the chill of eternity, the weight of unfinished business, and the terrible burden of being caught forever between two worlds. For Mary still walks Archer Avenue, still seeks her final ride home, still appears to those whose hearts hold enough compassion to stop for a stranger in the night. And sometimes, just sometimes, that stranger carries with her mysteries that will haunt your dreams long after the sun rises and rational thought returns to banish the shadows of the night. The Hookman, terror at Lover's Lane. In the collective unconscious of American youth culture, few images strike deeper terror than the sound of metal scratching against metal, the scrape of sharp steel dragging across an automobile's painted surface. This primal fear finds its perfect expression in one of our nation's most enduring campfire tales, the legend of the Hookman, a cautionary narrative that has haunted American teenagers since the 1950s. The Hookman represents what folklorists call a classic urban legend, a story that follows consistent structural patterns while adapting to local conditions and contemporary fears. Unlike historical ghost stories tied to specific locations or individuals, the Hookman exists purely as cultural narrative, designed to transmit social anxieties and behavioral warnings through memorable storytelling. Picture any small town in the heartland during the 1950s, when automobiles represented freedom and young love found expression in the privacy of darkened back roads. The decade following World War II brought prosperity and leisure to many American families, along with the cultural phenomenon of teenage dating. Drive-in theaters, soda fountains, and the infamous lovers' lanes became the stage upon which young romance played out its ancient dramas. The archetypal Hookman story, documented by folklorists across multiple regions, follows a consistent pattern. A young couple parks in a secluded location. Radio news reports mention an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand. Strange sounds are heard outside the vehicle, and the couple flees. only to discover evidence suggesting they narrowly escaped a deadly encounter. This narrative structure appears in American folklore collections from the 1950s onward, with regional variations adapted to local fears and circumstances. The story serves clear psychological functions, warning about the dangers of isolation, reinforcing parental authority about appropriate teenage behavior, and processing anxieties about mental illness and social deviance. The narrative typically begins with Tom and Patricia, names that vary across tellings, but represent archetypal teenage lovers of the era. They drive to a secluded overlook, seeking privacy for innocent romance. The location itself carries significance in the story's symbolic structure. Always isolated, always surrounded by dark woods, always positioned where help seems impossibly far away. While no specific hookman killings have been documented in police records, the story reflects real anxieties about crimes against couples in parked cars. The FBI's crime statistics from the 1950s and 1960s do document attacks on young people in isolated locations, providing factual basis for the fears the legend addresses. As they sit in Tom's father's Chevrolet, the radio plays soft music interspersed with regular news bulletins. The announcer's voice carries an increasing note of urgency as he describes the escape of Calvin Morrison from the state mental institution. It should be noted that while the specific details vary by region, the core elements of the escaped patient remain consistent across tellings, suggesting either a shared cultural memory or the universal nature of the fears the story addresses. Morrison, the name changes with each telling, but the description remains horrifyingly constant, is described as violently insane, confined to the asylum after murdering 3 young women with the steel hook that has replaced his severed right hand. The radio announcer warns that Morrison was last seen heading toward their county, that all citizens should lock their doors and report any suspicious activity to local authorities. Patricia immediately suggests they leave, her feminine intuition sensing danger that Tom's masculine pride initially dismisses. This gender dynamic forms a crucial element of the tale. The woman's instinctive caution contrasted with the man's desire to appear fearless before his companion. Tom reassures her that they are safe, that no madman could find them in such a remote location, that his presence will protect her from any conceivable harm. The first sign of wrongness comes as a scratching sound against the car's exterior, soft at first, barely audible over the radio's romantic melodies. Tom attributes it to wind-blown branches, though both young people notice that the night has grown strangely still. The scratching continues, develops a rhythm that suggests purpose rather than random motion. Patricia's anxiety intensifies into genuine fear as the scratching becomes more pronounced, more deliberate. She begs Tom to start the engine and drive them back to town, but his pride prevents immediate capitulation. He steps outside to investigate, leaving Patricia alone in the darkened vehicle with only the radio's soft music for company. Minutes pass, 5, 10, 15, without Tom's return. Patricia's calls receive no response, save the echo of her own voice bouncing back from the surrounding trees. The scratching sound resumes, now accompanied by what she describes as heavy breathing just beyond the passenger window, though the glass reveals only impenetrable darkness. When the radio announces that Morrison has been spotted in their immediate area, that he is considered extremely dangerous and likely to be hiding in wooded terrain, Patricia's nerve finally breaks. She slides across the bench seat, starts the engine with hands shaking so violently she can barely turn the key, and accelerates toward town without stopping to locate Tom. Only when she reaches the safety of well-lit streets does she discover the truth that will haunt her dreams for the remainder of her days. There, hanging from the passenger door handle like some macabre trophy, dangles Tom's severed head, his face frozen in an expression of terminal terror, his throat torn open by the same steel hook that had claimed his life. This climactic detail varies significantly between tellings. Some versions feature the hook itself caught on the door handle. Others describe scratching sounds that reveal claw marks the next morning. The psychological impact remains consistent regardless of the specific ending chosen. The Hookman legend rapidly spread throughout American youth culture during the 1950s and 1960s, adapted to local circumstances while retaining its essential elements. Drive-in movie theaters became common settings, with the escaped madman interrupting romantic interludes between horror film double features. Summer camps elevated the tale to high art, with counselors using it to discourage unauthorized nighttime expeditions. Each region developed its own variations. In the South, the hook-handed killer was often described as a former soldier, driven mad by wartime trauma. His prosthetic, a reminder of sacrifice, transformed into instrument of vengeance. Western versions sometimes featured railroad workers or miners who had lost limbs in industrial accidents before descending into homicidal madness. Northern tellings often incorporated elements of winter isolation, with the killer stalking couples, stranded by snowstorms or automobile breakdowns. But regardless of regional variation, the Hookman served the same psychological function, expressing teenage anxieties about sexuality, independence, and the price of rebellion against parental authority. The secluded lover's lane represented freedom from adult supervision, but also vulnerability to dangers that family protection might have prevented. The legend also reflected broader cultural anxieties about mental illness and social deviance. The 1950s marked a period when large state mental institutions housed thousands of patients under conditions that would be considered inhumane by contemporary standards. Fear of escaped lunatics was not entirely unfounded. Understaffed facilities occasionally lost track of dangerous patients, and newspaper accounts of such incidents provided fertile ground for folklore elaboration. The Hookman's physical description carries deep psychological significance. The hook itself represents a fusion of human form with mechanical apparatus, a violation of bodily integrity that suggests the dehumanizing effects of modern technology and institutional treatment. The weapon becomes an extension of the killer's rage, more personal than a gun, more primitive than a knife, combining the worst aspects of both human malice and industrial accident. Contemporary urban legend researchers have documented dozens of actual crimes that bear superficial resemblance to Hookman encounters. Attacks on young couples in parked cars, discoveries of evidence suggesting narrow escapes from unknown assailants, cases where victims reported seeing shadowy figures with unusual hand configurations. While none have been definitively linked to hook-handed killers, the pattern suggests that the legend may have been inspired by genuine criminal activity, then evolved through countless retellings into its current archetypal form. Skeptical analysis reveals that many alleged Hookman encounters can be attributed to natural phenomena, animal scratching, wind-blown debris, or the psychological effects of suggestion on already nervous individuals. However, the legend's persistence and emotional resonance suggest it serves important cultural functions beyond mere entertainment. The psychological impact of Hookman stories extends far beyond the campfire circle. Generations of American teenagers have internalized the tale's central message, that privacy comes with risk, that isolation invites danger, that the price of romantic freedom might be paid in blood. The story serves as both cautionary tale and rite of passage, marking the transition from childhood innocence to adult awareness of the world's inherent dangers. The legend has also influenced actual behavior in measurable ways. Police departments in areas with active lovers' lanes report increased calls for security patrols following local retellings of Hookman stories. Parents use the tale to discourage teenage children from venturing into remote areas unsupervised. Young couples themselves often invoke the legend when deciding whether to accept the risks associated with secluded romantic encounters. Modern versions of the Hookman have adapted to contemporary circumstances while retaining their essential power. Urban settings replace rural lovers' lanes, but parking garages and abandoned lots serve similar functions as spaces of isolation and vulnerability. The escaped mental patient has sometimes been replaced by other figures of fear: serial killers, gang members, or simply crazy homeless people, reflecting current social anxieties rather than outdated concerns about asylum security. The rise of digital technology has created new variations on the theme. Cell phone coverage becomes unreliable at crucial moments. GPS systems malfunction when couples need directions to safety. And social media posts about the hookman's presence spread faster than official warnings, creating atmospheres of communal fear that enhance the legend's psychological impact. Environmental factors also play crucial roles in modern hookman encounters. Urban sprawl has eliminated many traditional lovers' lanes, but construction sites and abandoned commercial properties provide new settings for the tale. Climate change has created new weather patterns that enhance the story's atmospheric elements: unexpected fog banks, unseasonable storms, and temperature inversions that muffle sound and distort vision. The legend's persistence demonstrates the powerful role that shared fears play in cultural bonding. Each generation rediscovers the hookman through its own retellings, adapts the story to contemporary circumstances, and passes it on to younger listeners who will similarly modify it to reflect their own anxieties and experiences. Tonight, as you consider your own memories of young romance and forbidden adventures, remember that the hookman represents more than mere bogeyman. He embodies the price that must sometimes be paid for stepping outside the protective boundaries of civilization, for seeking privacy and intimacy in spaces where help cannot reach, and danger may be waiting just beyond the circle of light cast by a car's headlamps. Listen carefully to the sounds that surround you now. That scraping against your window. Is it merely a tree branch moved by autumn wind? That shadow moving beyond your vision? Might it be nothing more than darkness shifting as clouds pass across the moon? Most likely, yes. But sometimes, just sometimes, the scratching carries the rhythm of purpose, and the shadow conceals a figure whose right hand was lost long ago to accident or design, replaced by something sharp enough to open car doors and strong enough to drag screaming victims into the night. For the hook man still roams the back roads of America, still seeks young couples foolish enough to believe that love can protect them from the malevolence that dwells in dark places. His hook still scrapes against metal and glass, still opens doors that should remain locked, still serves as the last thing that terrified eyes see before eternal darkness claims them. The Weeping Woman, La Llorona's American journey. From the mist-shrouded riverbanks of the Rio Grande to the fog-wrapped bridges of New England, a terrible keening echoes through the American night. It is the sound of inconsolable grief, of maternal love transformed into something monstrous, of sin so profound that death itself cannot grant absolution. This is the cry of La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, whose legend transcended its origins in Mexican folklore to become one of America's most haunting campfire tales. La Llorona represents one of the most widespread and persistent legends in the Americas, with documented variations found throughout Mexico, Central America, and the American Southwest. Unlike urban legends that can be traced to specific origins, La Llorona appears to have evolved from pre-Columbian indigenous myths, Spanish colonial influences, and regional folk traditions over several centuries. The classical version of the tale, as preserved in Mexican oral tradition and documented by folklorists, centers on a woman who drowns her children and is condemned to eternal searching for them. However, the specific details, the woman's name, historical period, and exact circumstances vary significantly across different cultural regions and family traditions. Academic folklore collections, including those compiled by Maria Tatar and Americo Paredes, document hundreds of La Llorona variants. While the core narrative elements remain consistent, maternal infanticide, drowning, eternal punishment, the cultural contexts and moral frameworks vary considerably depending on the storytelling community. Picture the American Southwest in the 1880s, when Mexican traditions carried northward by migrating families encountered German, Irish, and Anglo-Saxon ghost stories brought west by homesteaders. In this cultural crucible, La Llorona evolved from regional Mexican folklore into a distinctly American legend, adapted to new landscapes while retaining its essential psychological power. The narrative structure follows what folklorists term the warning tale pattern. A beautiful woman named Maria makes tragic choices driven by vanity and desperation, loses her children through her own actions, and becomes a supernatural entity who threatens other children. This framework serves multiple cultural functions: moral instruction, behavioral warning, and psychological processing of maternal guilt and community trauma. Historical documentation for specific La Llorona incidents remains within the realm of folklore rather than verified fact. However, colonial church records from Mexico and the American Southwest do contain accounts of infanticide cases, domestic violence, and family tragedies that may have contributed to the legend's development and persistence. The nobleman, descriptions vary, but he is consistently portrayed as handsome, charming, and fundamentally unreliable, courted Maria with the intensity that only the wealthy can afford. Gifts of jewelry, silk gowns, and exotic perfumes arrived regularly, each accompanied by letters promising eternal devotion. Their romance blazed like wildfire through the small community, generating both envy and disapproval among neighbors who understood that such passion rarely led to lasting happiness. When Maria discovered her pregnancy, she felt certain that motherhood would finally compel her lover to formalize their relationship. The birth of their first child, a son whose dark eyes mirrored his father's, seemed to fulfill her dreams of domestic happiness. But the nobleman's visits became less frequent, his gifts less extravagant, his promises more vague. A second pregnancy followed, producing a daughter whose beauty rivaled her mother's. Yet rather than solidifying the family bond, the children seemed to serve as obstacles to the nobleman's continued interest. His letters spoke increasingly of obligations in distant cities, of family expectations that prevented immediate marriage, of circumstances that required patience and understanding. The truth revealed itself with the cruel clarity that only gossip can provide. The nobleman had married within his own social circle, chosen a bride whose family connections served his political ambitions better than love ever could. Maria's children were acknowledged as his offspring, but they would never bear his name, never inherit his property, never be anything more than beautiful reminders of a passion that had outlived its usefulness. The psychological transformation that followed can only be understood through the lens of absolute desperation. Maria had invested everything, her reputation, her future, her very identity, in a relationship that had existed primarily in her imagination. The reality of abandonment struck with such force that her mind fractured under the pressure, seeking escape through denial, then bargaining, then rage that eclipsed all maternal instinct. The villagers would later disagree about the specifics of what happened next, but all accounts converged on the essential horror. On a moonless night, when the river ran high with spring floods, Maria took her children to the water's edge. Whether she intended murder or merely threatened it as a means of compelling their father's return, none could say with certainty. What followed was witnessed by several residents who heard the children's screams echoing across the water, saw Maria's white dress fluttering like a ghost in the darkness. By dawn, both children had drowned. Maria's body was found 3 days later, caught in the roots of a cottonwood tree that had stood beside the river for over a century. The circumstances of her death remained ambiguous: suicide, accident, or divine punishment, depending on the theological perspective of the observer. But the children's funeral procession, attended by the entire community, marked only the beginning of the tragedy that would haunt the river for generations to come. The first reports of supernatural activity began within weeks of Maria's burial. Fishermen working the river at dawn heard the sound of a woman weeping, calling children's names that seemed to drift across the water like fog. The voice carried such anguish that strong men found themselves crying without understanding why, overcome by grief that belonged to someone else's sorrow. As months passed, the encounters became more specific, more terrifying. Children playing near the river reported seeing a woman in white walking along the banks, her face hidden by long dark hair, her arms reaching toward the water, as if searching for something precious that had been lost. Adults who glimpsed her described a figure of such profound sadness that merely witnessing her presence could induce depression lasting for weeks. But La Llorona's manifestations were not confined to passive sorrow. Parents throughout the region began warning their children to avoid the river after dark, for the weeping woman was said to mistake other youngsters for her own drowned offspring. Her maternal instinct, twisted by guilt and supernatural existence, compelled her to gather children to replace those she had lost, dragging them beneath the water to keep her company in death. The legend spread northward along with Mexican immigration during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, adapting to new geographical and cultural contexts while retaining its essential psychological power. In Texas, La Llorona haunted the creeks and stock tanks that sustained cattle ranches, her cries echoing across the prairie during storms. New Mexican versions placed her along the acequia systems that carried irrigation water through agricultural communities, where her presence was said to bring drought or flood, depending on her mood. As the story traveled beyond its original cultural boundaries, it encountered and merged with similar legends from other traditions. Anglo settlers contributed their own stories of water-associated ghosts, phantom women who drowned in mill ponds, spirits of mothers who lost children to river accidents, vengeful entities seeking to drag the living into watery graves. Folklorists note that the weeping woman archetype appears in cultures worldwide, suggesting either shared psychological patterns or ancient common origins that predate written history. The American adaptation demonstrates how universal themes can be adapted to specific cultural and geographical contexts. The psychological implications of the La Llorona legend extend far beyond simple ghost story entertainment. She represents the ultimate expression of maternal guilt. The mother whose failures have consequences that extend beyond death into eternal punishment. Her endless search for replacement children reflects the desperate attempts that some parents make to undo irreversible tragedies through impossible substitutions. The story also serves as powerful commentary on the consequences of romantic illusion. Maria's tragedy began with her refusal to acknowledge the reality of her situation, her insistence on believing promises that contradicted observable evidence. Her beauty became a trap that prevented her from developing the practical skills and emotional resilience necessary for survival in a world that offered few protections for unmarried mothers. Contemporary versions of La Llorona have adapted to modern American circumstances while retaining their essential power to disturb and instruct. Urban settings replace rural rivers, but the basic pattern remains. A woman destroys her children through desperation or madness, then returns as a supernatural entity seeking to replace them with other people's offspring. Modern La Llorona encounters often occur near bridges, storm drains, or retention ponds in suburban developments built on land where rivers once flowed. The rapid pace of American urban development has buried many waterways beneath concrete and steel, but the spirits associated with those places seem to persist, manifesting in new forms adapted to contemporary landscapes. environmental disasters have created new contexts for the legend. Chemical spills that contaminate water supplies, industrial accidents that poison aquifers, and climate change effects that alter traditional water patterns all provide opportunities for La Llorona's modern manifestations. She appears now not just as wronged mother, but as avenging spirit of environmental destruction, seeking justice for crimes against the natural world that sustains all life. The legend has also evolved to address contemporary social issues. Immigration stories feature La Llorona appearing to families crossing rivers at the border, sometimes as warning of danger, sometimes as malevolent force attempting to claim children separated from their parents during hazardous journeys. Child custody cases that turn violent have generated new versions where the weeping woman represents mothers driven to desperate acts by legal systems that fail to protect families. Technology has created new opportunities for La Llorona encounters. Security cameras at water treatment facilities occasionally capture unexplained figures. Social media posts describe hearing weeping sounds near urban waterways. And smartphone recordings sometimes preserve audio that seems to include children's voices calling for help from locations where no children should be present. The environmental justice movement has embraced La Llorona as symbol of communities forced to sacrifice their children's health and future to industrial pollution. Her weeping echoes in neighborhoods where cancer rates spike near chemical plants, where asthma afflicts children living downwind from refineries, where lead poisoning steals young minds in areas with contaminated water supplies. The persistence of La Llorona encounters in modern America demonstrates the enduring power of maternal archetypes to express collective guilt about the treatment of children and families. She appears wherever society fails its most vulnerable members, wherever adult decisions create consequences that children must bear, wherever the price of progress is paid by those who had no voice in choosing it. Research into contemporary La Llorona manifestations reveals patterns that suggest genuine paranormal activity rather than mere psychological projection. Multiple witnesses at different times report identical descriptions of the weeping woman at specific locations. Electronic voice phenomena captured near water sources sometimes include Spanish phrases expressing maternal grief, even in areas with no significant Hispanic population. While skeptical analysis can attribute many La Llorona encounters to misidentification of natural sounds, psychological suggestion, or cultural transmission, the geographic specificity and emotional consistency of reports suggest that certain locations retain impressions of tragic events that transcend normal explanation. Tonight, as you listen to water flowing somewhere in the distance, perhaps rain in gutters, perhaps a creek beyond your window, consider the mothers throughout history who have faced impossible choices between love and survival. Remember that La Llorona's story serves as both warning and reminder, that some losses create wounds that death cannot heal, that some guilt transcends the boundaries of mortal existence, and that the sound of weeping can carry truths about the human condition that daylight prefers to ignore. For she still walks beside the waters of America, still searches for the children she destroyed through desperation and madness, still calls their names in a voice that can freeze blood and break hearts. And sometimes, when conditions are right and the veil between worlds grows thin, other children hear her calling and mistake her invitation for the voice of someone who loves them enough to protect them from all harm, never understanding that her embrace leads not to safety, but to the cold depths where her own children wait in eternal darkness. The Grey Man of Pauley's Island, the helpful phantom. Not all American ghost stories speak of malevolence and revenge. Sometimes the dead return not to punish the living, but to protect them from dangers that mortal eyes cannot perceive. Such is the remarkable tale of the Grey Man of Pauley's Island, South Carolina, a benevolent spirit whose appearances herald approaching storms while offering salvation to those wise enough to heed his warnings. Picture the South Carolina coast in the early 1800s, where barrier islands rise from salt marshes like ancient battlements against the Atlantic's fury. Paoli's Island, that narrow strip of sand and palmetto trees, had served as summer refuge for rice plantation families seeking relief from inland heat and fever. Here, where the rhythm of tides marked time more surely than any clock, where hurricane seasons brought destruction as regular as harvest time, the boundary between natural and supernatural seemed particularly permeable. The legend begins with young Percival Pauli, namesake of the island his family owned, returning from studies at Harvard College in 1822 to claim his inheritance and the hand of his beloved, Miss Emily Fraser. Percival had spent 4 years in New England, acquiring the polish and education expected of a Charleston gentleman, but his heart had remained anchored to the low-country girl who had promised to wait for his return. Historical records confirm that the Pauli family did indeed own the island during this period, and that several family members died in accidents during the early 19th century, though specific details of individual deaths remain within the realm of folklore rather than documented fact. The reunion should have been triumphant. The educated young man returning to claim his destiny, the faithful young woman rewarded for her patience. 2 prominent families united through marriage that would strengthen both their fortunes. But fate, as it so often does, had prepared a different conclusion to their romantic narrative. Percival chose to ride alone across the salt marshes that separated the island from the mainland, refusing his father's offer of guides who knew the treacherous paths that wound between tidal creeks and pluff mud deposits. His Massachusetts education had filled him with confidence in his own capabilities, dismissing as superstition the warnings that local residents offered about tide schedules and shifting channels. The horse that carried him toward his beloved was a fine thoroughbred, bred for speed on solid ground, but wholly unsuited for navigating the deceptive terrain of the low-country marshes. As afternoon shadows lengthened and the incoming tide began to flood the narrow causeways, Percival found himself trapped in a maze of waterways that looked nothing like the paths he had remembered from childhood. The marsh grass, so beautiful when viewed from a distance, became a prison of razor-sharp blades that cut both horse and rider. The pluff mud, innocuous in appearance, revealed itself as a substance with the consistency of quicksand, capable of swallowing a horse and rider without leaving trace of their passage. As the tide rose higher, transforming solid ground into treacherous swamp, Percival realized that his homecoming would become his funeral. They found his body 3 days later, partially buried in the mud where his horse had thrown him during its death struggles. The expensive clothes purchased in Boston were ruined by salt water and decomposition, but the gold ring intended for Emily's finger still gleamed on his lifeless hand, a symbol of promises that death had prevented him from keeping. Emily Fraser's grief was absolute, immediate, and enduring. The wedding dress that had been carefully preserved in lavender and tissue paper was packed away unworn. The future that had sustained her through 4 years of separation dissolved like morning mist, leaving her with nothing but memories of what might have been. But love, true love, does not acknowledge death as final boundary. Within months of Percival's funeral, strange reports began circulating among the island's residents. Fishermen working the early morning tides described encounters with a figure in grey clothing who appeared on the beach during periods of unusual weather activity, pointing toward the mainland with urgent gestures that seemed to communicate warnings about approaching danger. The first documented encounter occurred in September 1823, exactly 1 year after Percival's death. Captain William Weston was preparing his shrimp boat for an extended fishing expedition when a man in grey approached along the waterline, walking with the purposeful stride of someone carrying important news. The stranger's appearance was disturbing in ways that Weston found difficult to articulate. His clothing appeared normal from a distance: grey jacket, grey trousers, grey hat pulled low over features that remained shadowed despite the morning sunlight. But up close, details became strangely fluid. as if the figure existed slightly out of focus with the surrounding reality. Most unsettling was the stranger's face, or rather the absence of clear facial features. Where eyes, nose and mouth should have been distinct, Weston saw only vague impressions, like a portrait painted on canvas that had been left too long in the rain. The grey man spoke without moving his lips, communicated urgency without raising his voice, conveyed specific information about weather conditions that proved uncannily accurate. "Storm coming," the figure warned in a voice like wind through marsh grass. "Bad one. Get your family inland. Get them safe. Trust me in this." Weston later admitted that he might have dismissed the encounter as hallucination or practical joke, but something in the grey man's manner compelled belief. The warning carried the weight of absolute certainty, the authority of someone who had witnessed disasters that mortal eyes could not yet perceive. Within hours, Weston had moved his family to higher ground and secured his boat against weather that meteorological science of the era could not have predicted. The hurricane that struck that evening was the worst in living memory, destroying half the buildings on Powley's Island and claiming 17 lives among those who had ignored evacuation warnings. Weston's family survived unharmed. His boat suffered minimal damage, and his faith in the grey man's protective intentions was established for the remainder of his long life. Over the following decades, the grey man's appearances became legendary throughout the South Carolina coast. His manifestations always preceded severe weather events by 12 to 48 hours, providing advance warning that saved countless lives and properties. Unlike other ghost stories that featured malevolent spirits seeking to harm the living, the grey man consistently demonstrated benevolent intentions, using his supernatural awareness to protect communities that had shown kindness to his memory. The pattern of his appearances revealed sophisticated understanding of meteorological conditions that surpassed contemporary human knowledge. He materialized before hurricanes that weather stations could not yet detect, warned of storm surges that surprised even experienced coastal residents, and provided specific guidance about evacuation routes and safety measures that proved crucial for survival. Modern meteorological analysis suggests that the grey man's warnings often preceded storms by longer periods than 19th century weather prediction technology could have achieved, indicating either remarkable coincidence or access to information sources beyond normal human perception. Emily Fraser, the young woman whose grief had perhaps anchored Percival's spirit to the physical realm, lived to age 87 without marrying, dedicating her life to charitable works and weather monitoring. She kept detailed records of grey man appearances, correlating his manifestations with subsequent storm events, creating what may be the first systematic documentation of paranormal weather prediction. Her journals, preserved in the Georgetown County Historical Society, describe dozens of encounters with the grey man throughout the 19th century. Emily's descriptions remained consistent across decades. The same grey clothing, the same indistinct facial features, the same urgent warnings delivered in tones of absolute authority. But perhaps most remarkably, Emily reported that the grey man's warnings often came to her through dreams rather than direct physical encounters. She would wake before dawn with precise knowledge of approaching weather systems, specific instructions about evacuation procedures, and unshakable certainty that the information came from Percival's continued presence in her life. The grey man's protective influence extended beyond individual storm warnings to encompass broader patterns of coastal safety. Families that heeded his advice consistently survived disasters that claimed neighbors who ignored supernatural guidance. Properties that received his attention often suffered less damage than structures in similar locations that had been overlooked by his supernatural surveillance. The phenomenon gained national attention during the 20th century as communication improvements allowed word of grey man encounters to spread beyond local communities. Weather service personnel began documenting reports of the phenomenon, though official policies prevented acknowledgement of supernatural weather prediction as valid scientific data. The most famous modern encounter occurred in 1989, when Hurricane Hugo approached the South Carolina coast as one of the most powerful storms in recorded history. Bill and Marilyn Leith, vacationing at Powley's Island, reported meeting the Grey Man during an early morning walk on the beach. According to their detailed account provided to multiple news outlets, the Grey Man appeared as they watched sunrise over the Atlantic, approaching from the south with the measured pace of someone carrying urgent business. His grey clothing rippled in wind that they could not feel. His indistinct features conveyed expressions of concern that they could not see clearly, but understood perfectly. "Storm's coming," he told them in words they heard without seeing his lips move. "Big one. Worse than most. Get off the island. Get inland. Don't wait." The Leiths had planned to extend their vacation for several more days, but something in the Grey Man's manner convinced them to pack immediately and return to their home in North Carolina. Hugo struck the coast 36 hours later with winds exceeding 140 miles per hour, destroying or severely damaging virtually every structure on Powley's Island. When the Leiths returned weeks later to survey the devastation, they found their vacation rental completely destroyed, the lot where it had stood scoured clean by storm surge. But remarkably, the beach where they had encountered the Grey Man remained virtually unchanged, as if his presence had provided protection, even for the sand beneath his feet. Contemporary investigations into Grey Man phenomena have revealed patterns suggesting genuine paranormal activity rather than mere coincidence or suggestion. Multiple witnesses at different times report identical physical descriptions of the entity. Weather correlation studies show statistical significance in storm prediction accuracy that exceeds chance probability. Electronic monitoring equipment placed in areas of frequent Grey Man sightings has recorded anomalous electromagnetic activity preceding severe weather events. Temperature variations, barometric pressure changes, and other atmospheric anomalies appear to coincide with reported manifestations, suggesting that the entity's appearances may be associated with genuine meteorological phenomena. While skeptical analysis can attribute some Grey Man encounters to misidentification of natural phenomena or unconscious pattern recognition of weather signs, the consistency and accuracy of warnings attributed to the entity suggests something beyond normal explanation. The psychological implications of the Grey Man legend extend beyond simple ghost story entertainment into profound questions about love's ability to transcend death. Percival's continued protection of Powley's Island residents suggests that some emotional bonds remain active even after physical dissolution, that true devotion can manifest as ongoing service to community welfare. The benevolent nature of his manifestations provides counterpoint to the generally malevolent spirits featured in most American folklore. The Grey Man demonstrates that supernatural intervention need not be feared, that contact with the dead can serve positive purposes, and that some ghosts return not to frighten the living, but to serve as guardians against dangers that mortal perception cannot detect. Modern environmental concerns have given new relevance to the Grey Man's protective role. Climate change has intensified hurricane activity along the Atlantic coast, making accurate early warning systems more crucial than ever for coastal community survival. Some contemporary witnesses report that the Grey Man's appearances have become more frequent, his warnings more urgent, as if supernatural intelligence recognizes the increased threats posed by changing weather patterns. The legend also serves as a reminder that wisdom can come from unexpected sources, that dismissing information based on its supernatural origin may cost lives that conventional forecasting might have saved. The Grey Man's century-long track record of accurate storm prediction suggests that pragmatic survival sometimes requires setting aside scientific skepticism in favor of empirical results. Tonight, as you consider the mysteries that surround human consciousness and its ability to persist beyond physical death, remember that not all hauntings spring from malevolence or unfinished business. Sometimes love itself provides the energy necessary for continued existence, transforming grief into service, death into ongoing protection of those who remain among the living. The grey man still walks the beaches of Powley's Island, still watches the horizon for signs of approaching storms, still offers warnings to those wise enough to listen for voices that speak from beyond the grave. His presence reminds us that death need not end our capacity to serve others, that true love finds ways to continue protecting those it cannot bear to leave unguarded, and that sometimes the most important messages come from messengers whose existence challenges everything we thought we understood about the boundaries between life and death. For in the end, the grey man's story teaches that the greatest hauntings are not those that terrify us, but those that demonstrate love's refusal to accept death as final boundary, hope's insistence on finding ways to serve even from beyond the grave, and the possibility that consciousness may survive in forms that science has not yet learned to recognize or measure. The Bell Witch, America's most documented haunting. In the annals of American supernatural history, no case has been more thoroughly documented, witnessed by more credible observers, or subjected to more rigorous investigation than the Bell Witch of Adams, Tennessee. This extraordinary phenomenon, which plagued the Bell family from 1817 to 1821, stands apart from typical ghost stories due to the extensive contemporary documentation and the caliber of witnesses who testified to the events. The Bell Witch case represents one of the most well-documented paranormal phenomena in American history. Contemporary accounts include letters, diary entries, and sworn testimonies from dozens of witnesses, including prominent citizens, ministers, doctors, and eventually Andrew Jackson himself. Court records, newspaper accounts, and family documents provide verification for many of the basic facts surrounding the case, though interpretation of the phenomena remains contentious. The case is unique in American folklore because it occurred in a specific time and place, involved identifiable historical figures, and left a substantial paper trail of contemporary documentation. John Bell Sr., his wife Lucy, and their children were real people whose existence and prominence in the Adams community is verified by census records, property deeds, and church documents. While the supernatural aspects of the Bell Witch story cannot be scientifically verified, the historical authenticity of the Bell family, their social prominence, and the involvement of documented witnesses distinguishes this case from purely fictional folklore or urban legends. The disturbances began in 1817 with subtle phenomena that John Bell Sr. documented in letters preserved by the Tennessee State Library. Strange animals observed on the property, unexplained knocking sounds within the family cabin, and gradually escalating supernatural manifestations were recorded contemporaneously rather than reconstructed from later memory. What transformed these initial disturbances into a legendary haunting was the emergence of an intelligent entity that could communicate through speech, demonstrated detailed knowledge of events occurring beyond the Bell property, and accurately predicted future occurrences with uncanny precision. The intelligence and apparent omniscience displayed by the Bell Witch represents the most challenging aspect of the case for conventional explanation. Contemporary witnesses recorded specific predictions that were later verified, detailed knowledge of private conversations that occurred elsewhere, and demonstrated abilities that seemed to exceed normal human capabilities. The entity's systematic persecution of John Bell Sr. culminated in his death in December 1820, under circumstances that contemporary physicians found medically inexplicable. The mysterious liquid found beside Bell's deathbed, which the entity claimed responsibility for administering, proved fatal to a test animal within minutes, a fact documented by attending physician Dr. George Hobson. Dr. Hobson's medical records, preserved in the Tennessee Historical Society archives, document his examination of John Bell's symptoms and his testing of the unknown substance. While modern toxicology might provide explanations for the mysterious poison, the circumstances surrounding its appearance remain unexplained by conventional means. The entity's activities escalated systematically, as if testing the family's responses while gradually revealing its capabilities. The knocking evolved into more complex sounds, scratching within the walls, footsteps in empty rooms, voices whispering just beyond the range of clear comprehension. Bed coverings were pulled from sleeping family members, despite the absence of any visible agent. Personal belongings disappeared and reappeared in impossible locations. But it was the emergence of the entity's voice that transformed mere poltergeist activity into something approaching personal persecution. The Bell Witch, as neighbors began calling the phenomenon, developed the ability to communicate through speech that seemed to originate from thin air, using multiple voices that claimed different identities and backgrounds. Sometimes the entity spoke in the voice of an elderly woman, claiming to be Old Kate Batts, a neighbor with whom John Bell had experienced property disputes. At other times, it assumed the identity of a Native American chief, speaking in broken English while making threats against the Bell family's continued occupation of land it claimed as ancestral territory. Most disturbing were the occasions when it perfectly mimicked the voices of living family members, carrying on conversations with itself using different personalities, while the actual people remained silent. The psychological impact on the Bell family was immediate and devastating. Sleep became impossible as the entity's nocturnal activities intensified. Youngest daughter Betsy, then 13 years old, became the primary target of the witch's attention, experiencing physical attacks that left visible marks, scratches, bruises, and bite marks that appeared spontaneously while witnesses watched in horror. Betsy's afflictions followed patterns familiar from European witchcraft cases, but adapted to American frontier circumstances. The entity would pull her hair so violently that observers feared for her scalp, slap her face hard enough to leave handprints, and pin her to walls or ceilings through force that defied gravitational law. During these attacks, Betsy often entered trance-like states, during which she spoke in voices not her own, revealing information she could not have obtained through normal means. Medical examination of Betsy by frontier physicians found no evidence of self-inflicted injury or psychological disorder that could account for the physical phenomena witnessed by multiple observers. Contemporary accounts describe symptoms consistent with severe poltergeist infestation rather than mental illness or fraud. The entity's intelligence became apparent through its detailed knowledge of events occurring beyond the Bell property. It accurately described conversations taking place in distant locations, revealed secrets known only to specific individuals, and demonstrated familiarity with regional history spanning decades before its first manifestation. This supernatural awareness extended to prophetic abilities, predicting deaths, crop failures, and other future events with uncanny accuracy. Word of the Bell Witch spread throughout Tennessee and beyond, attracting visitors who came to witness supernatural phenomena firsthand. The entity seemed to relish these audiences, performing increasingly dramatic manifestations for the benefit of skeptical observers. It would sing hymns in perfect harmony with itself using multiple voices, recite lengthy passages from memory, and engage in theological debates with visiting ministers who came to exorcise what they assumed was demonic possession. The witch's interactions with visitors revealed a personality of remarkable complexity and malevolence. It claimed to know intimate details about each person's past, threatening to reveal embarrassing secrets unless they showed proper respect for its supernatural authority. Politicians, judges, and other prominent citizens found themselves subjected to public humiliation as the entity exposed their private failings with gleeful malice. But the Bell Witch reserved its most concentrated hostility for John Bell Sr., whom it had apparently marked for destruction from the beginning of its manifestation. The entity made no secret of its intention to kill the family patriarch, delivering daily threats with increasing specificity about the methods it would employ. Bell's health began to deteriorate under the psychological strain, developing symptoms that frontier medicine could neither explain nor treat effectively. The witch's persecution of John Bell took forms both subtle and dramatic. It would prevent him from eating by causing painful spasms whenever food touched his lips. It rendered him unable to speak at crucial moments during business negotiations, costing him significant financial losses. Most terrifying were the episodes during which the entity would physically attack Bell in front of witnesses, choking him until he lost consciousness, while leaving no visible means of strangulation. The climax of the haunting occurred in December 1820, when John Bell's mysterious illness finally claimed his life. Family members found him unconscious in his bedroom, beside a bottle of unknown liquid that the Bell Witch claimed responsibility for administering. When a family doctor attempted to test the substance on a farm cat, the animal died within minutes of ingestion, confirming the supernatural origin of Bell's demise. At John Bell's funeral, the Bell Witch manifested with unprecedented power, singing drinking songs and making jokes about the deceased while mourners tried to conduct burial services. The entity's celebration of its victim's death shocked even those who had witnessed years of supernatural persecution, demonstrating a level of malevolence that transcended ordinary human comprehension. Following John Bell's death, the witch's activities diminished gradually, though it maintained sporadic contact with the family for several more years. Before departing, it made two significant prophecies: that it would return to torment the Bell family again in exactly 107 years, and that its spiritual essence would remain active in the region, available to anyone who knew proper methods of supernatural summoning. The first prophecy proved partially accurate. Unexplained phenomena did occur at the former Bell property in 1927, though these manifestations lacked the intensity and duration of the original haunting. The second prophecy has generated ongoing reports of supernatural activity in the Adams area that continue to the present day. The Bell Witch case established several patterns that would become standard elements in American supernatural folklore. The focus on a specific family, the systematic escalation of supernatural attacks, the entity's apparent intelligence and malevolent personality, the involvement of community leaders as witnesses, and the ultimate victory of supernatural forces over human resistance became template elements for subsequent poltergeist accounts throughout the United States. The case also demonstrated the inadequacy of contemporary religious and medical explanations for supernatural phenomena. Multiple exorcisms performed by prominent ministers failed to diminish the entity's power. Medical examination of affected family members revealed no treatable conditions that could account for the observed symptoms. Scientific investigation, limited as it was by early 19th century knowledge, found no natural causes for the documented manifestations. Modern analysis of the Bell Witch case has generated numerous theories attempting to explain the phenomena through conventional means. Psychological explanations focus on family dynamics, suggesting that repressed tensions within the Bell household might have created conditions conducive to mass hysteria or unconscious fraud. Environmental factors such as underground limestone caves, unusual electromagnetic conditions, or geological anomalies have been proposed as potential triggers for apparently supernatural events. However, the sheer volume and consistency of witness testimony, combined with the intelligence and specific knowledge demonstrated by the entity, makes conventional explanations difficult to sustain. The case remains anomalous, even by contemporary paranormal research standards. The Bell Witch's influence on American supernatural culture extends far beyond its original manifestation. The case has inspired countless books, films, and scholarly investigations, establishing Tennessee's reputation as a center for supernatural activity. Tourist interest in the Bell Witch has generated economic benefits for Adams and surrounding communities that continue to market their connection to America's most famous haunting. The psychological implications of the Bell Witch case raise disturbing questions about the nature of supernatural malevolence and its relationship to human consciousness. Unlike ghosts that seem motivated by specific grievances or unfinished business, the Bell Witch demonstrated pure malice, supernatural intelligence dedicated to causing suffering for its own sake, rather than achieving any comprehensible goal. This aspect of the case challenges comfortable assumptions about supernatural entities as merely misunderstood spirits seeking peace or resolution. The Bell Witch appeared to be genuinely evil in ways that defied religious explanations about divine justice or karmic consequences. Its systematic destruction of an apparently virtuous family suggests that supernatural forces may operate according to principles that human morality cannot comprehend or accommodate. Contemporary paranormal researchers studying the Bell Witch phenomenon have documented ongoing supernatural activity in the Adams area that seems connected to the original manifestation. Electronic voice phenomena recorded at the former Bell property sometimes include threats and curses delivered in voices that match historical descriptions of the entity's various personas. Electromagnetic anomalies, temperature variations, and other measurable phenomena occur with statistical frequency that exceeds random probability. The case has also influenced modern understanding of poltergeist phenomena by providing historical precedent for supernatural entities that demonstrate complex personalities, sustained malevolent intentions, and capabilities that extend far beyond simple object manipulation or unexplained sounds. The Bell Witch's documented abilities to predict future events, reveal hidden information, and cause specific physical effects establish baseline expectations for subsequent paranormal investigations. Environmental factors in the Adams area continue to generate scientific interest. Geological surveys have identified unusual mineral compositions, underground water systems, and electromagnetic fields that differ significantly from surrounding regions. Some researchers speculate that these natural anomalies might create conditions that enhance psychic phenomena or provide energy sources for supernatural manifestations. While no definitive causal relationship has been established between environmental conditions and supernatural activity, the correlation between geographical anomalies and reported phenomena suggests areas for continued investigation. Tonight, as you consider the implications of genuine supernatural malevolence operating within ordinary human communities, remember that the Bell Witch represents more than historical curiosity or regional folklore. Its systematic campaign of terror against an innocent family demonstrates that some supernatural entities may be motivated by pure malice rather than comprehensible grievances or cosmic justice. The case serves as a reminder that supernatural protection mechanisms, religious faith, community support, scientific investigation may prove inadequate when confronted with entities whose intelligence equals or exceeds human capability while remaining unconstrained by human moral limitations. The Bell family's ultimate helplessness in the face of supernatural persecution raises uncomfortable questions about humanity's actual position within cosmic hierarchies that include non-human intelligence. For the Bell Witch accomplished what few supernatural entities have achieved: total victory over human resistance, complete fulfillment of its announced intentions, and establishment of ongoing influence that persists 2 centuries after its initial manifestation. Its legacy reminds us that some hauntings represent not mere supernatural nuisance, but encounters with forms of intelligence that view human suffering as entertainment, human death as achievement, and human powerlessness as cosmic joke worthy of eternal continuation. The Adams countryside still holds secrets that daylight cannot fully illuminate, still harbors forces that mock human attempts at understanding or control, still resonates with laughter that celebrates humanity's ultimate vulnerability to powers that recognize no law save their own malevolent pleasure. The Phantom Carriage of Cohoes Falls. In the industrial heart of New York State, where the Mohawk River plunges over ancient rock formations to join the Hudson's southward flow, stands a testament to American ingenuity and supernatural persistence. Cohoes Falls, that thundering cascade which powered the textile mills that clothed a growing nation, serves as backdrop for one of America's most haunting tales of love transcending death. The story of a phantom carriage that appears each winter night, carrying passengers whose journey ended in tragedy, but whose love refuses to accept such earthly limitations. Picture Cohoes in the winter of 1861, when the young nation stood poised on the brink of civil war, and the mill town prospered through contracts to produce uniforms for armies that would soon shed blood from Bull Run to Antietam. The falls roared with unusual fury that December, swollen by early snowmelt and winter storms, that turned the normally predictable cascade into a torrent of supernatural power. It was in this setting of industrial prosperity, shadowed by impending national tragedy, that Thomas Morrison, heir to the Morrison textile fortune, courted Miss Catherine Winfield, daughter of Cohoes' most prominent banking family. Their engagement represented not merely personal affection, but the joining of two commercial dynasties that controlled much of the region's economic activity. Historical records confirm the existence of both the Morrison and Winfield families as prominent Cohoes residents during the mid-19th century, though specific details about individual family members remain largely within oral tradition rather than documented history. Thomas and Catherine's romance had unfolded according to the social conventions of their class and era: formal courtship supervised by family members, public appearances at charitable functions, a wedding planned with meticulous attention to business alliance as well as personal happiness. But beneath these surface proprieties burned a passion that surprised both families with its intensity. Catherine, educated at fashionable seminaries and trained in the accomplishments expected of wealthy young women, possessed a spirit that chafed against conventional limitations. Her journals, preserved by the Cohoes Historical Society, reveal intelligence and independence that far exceeded contemporary expectations for feminine behavior. Thomas recognized and cherished these qualities that made Catherine unique among the eligible young women of their social circle. Their wedding was scheduled for Christmas Eve 1861, a choice that reflected both families' desire to celebrate their union during the season of peace and joy before Thomas departed to serve as officer in the Union Army. The ceremony would take place at St. Bernard's Church, with reception afterward at the Winfield Mansion overlooking the falls. December 23rd dawned clear and cold, with temperatures well below freezing and snow falling steadily since midnight. Thomas had spent the previous evening at his bachelor party, a restrained affair by contemporary standards that concluded with toasts to his future happiness and prayers for his safe return from military service. Catherine devoted the day to final preparations, supervising arrangements for the wedding feast while trying on her gown one final time. Her letters describe overwhelming happiness tempered by anxiety about their approaching separation. The war that had seemed distant when their engagement was announced had grown increasingly serious, demanding sacrifice from even the most privileged families. As evening approached, Thomas departed his family's mansion in the ornate carriage that would carry him to collect his bride for the wedding rehearsal. The vehicle itself was a masterpiece of a 19th century craftsmanship, black lacquered wood adorned with silver fittings, drawn by a matched pair of grey horses whose breeding represented generations of careful selection. The coachman, Patrick O'Brien, had served the Morrison family for over 20 years, earning reputation for skill and reliability that made him the natural choice to handle such an important occasion. O'Brien knew every road in the Cohoes area, had navigated them safely through countless storms and seasonal hazards, and took personal pride in ensuring his passengers' comfort and security. The route from the Morrison mansion to the Winfield estate followed the river road that offered spectacular views of the falls, particularly beautiful when winter ice formations created crystalline sculptures that caught moonlight like captured stars. Under normal circumstances, the journey required less than 30 minutes, even accounting for careful navigation on snow-covered roads. But December 23rd, 1861, would prove to be far from normal circumstances. As Thomas's carriage approached the curve where the river road offered its most dramatic vista of Cohoes Falls, a combination of factors created conditions that would transform routine journey into supernatural tragedy. The snowfall had intensified throughout the day, creating a deceptive surface that concealed underlying ice. The wind had shifted direction, creating unusual sound patterns that distorted normal auditory cues. Most significantly, the falls themselves were running at abnormally high volume, generating spray that had frozen on surrounding surfaces in patterns that confused both human perception and animal instinct. Witnesses later disagreed about the exact sequence of events that followed, but all accounts converged on the essential horror. The horses, spooked by some combination of sound, scent, and visual distortion, suddenly bolted towards the precipice that overlooked the falls. O'Brien's attempts to regain control of the animals proved futile as the carriage skidded across the ice-slicked roadway. Catherine, watching from her bedroom window for signs of Thomas's arrival, saw the carriage's lanterns swaying wildly in the distance, heard the horses' panicked whinnying carried on the winter wind, witnessed the vehicle disappear over the edge of the cliff in a trajectory that would carry it directly into the churning waters below. The rescue efforts that followed demonstrated the community's devotion to both families, but also the futility of human intervention against natural forces operating at supernatural scale. Men risked their lives descending treacherous paths to the river's edge, searching for survivors who could not possibly have escaped the violence of their descent. They found the carriage 3 days later, its broken remains scattered across ice formations at the base of the falls. Thomas's body was recovered first, his neck broken by impact, but his face strangely peaceful, as if death had come as relief rather than tragedy. O'Brien was discovered nearby, still clutching the reins that had failed to save his passengers' lives. The horses' bodies were never found, presumably swept away by currents that carried them toward the Hudson and eventually the sea. This detail would prove significant in subsequent supernatural manifestations, as the phantom carriage that began appearing soon after always seemed to be drawn by invisible animals whose presence could be sensed but never seen. Catherine's grief was absolute and immediate. The wedding dress that had been prepared with such joy was transformed into mourning attire through the simple addition of black trim. The church decorations intended for celebration became memorial displays honoring lives cut short by capricious fate. The reception hall was converted into site for one of the largest funerals in Cohoes history. But Catherine's mourning transcended conventional expression of loss, evolving into something approaching mystical communion with her deceased beloved. Family members reported that she spent hours standing at the bedroom window where she had witnessed the accident, staring toward the falls with expression of expectation that suggested she was waiting for someone whose arrival remained certain despite apparent impossibility. The first supernatural manifestation occurred exactly 1 month after the tragedy. Catherine's younger sister, Mary, was awakened by the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones, horses breathing heavily after exertion, and familiar voices speaking in tones too low for specific words to be distinguished. Looking from her window, Mary saw Thomas's carriage approaching the Winfield mansion exactly as it had on countless previous occasions. But this carriage moved with ethereal smoothness that left no tracks in fresh snow, drawn by horses whose grey forms seemed translucent in moonlight. Thomas himself sat upright in the passenger compartment, wearing the same evening clothes he had donned for their final meeting, his face bearing expression of joy and anticipation that death had apparently failed to diminish. Most remarkably, Catherine appeared beside him in the carriage, wearing her wedding dress and looking as radiantly happy as she had during their engagement. The phantom couple seemed unaware that their wedding plans had been interrupted by tragedy, that their earthly existence had ended in violence and grief, that their families mourned them as irretrievably lost. The appearance of Catherine as passenger in the phantom carriage has generated significant folklore debate since she remained alive at the time of these initial sightings. Some interpretations suggest that intense grief created bilocation phenomena, while others propose that Catherine's spirit had partially joined Thomas in death despite her body's continued physical existence. Mary watched in fascination as the phantom carriage completed its familiar route, stopping at the mansion's front entrance while Thomas helped Catherine descended, with the courtesy that had characterized their earthly relationship. Together, they walked toward the door, their forms growing increasingly transparent until they vanished entirely just before reaching the threshold. Word of Mary's encounter spread quickly through the close-knit community, generating both skepticism and additional witness accounts. Over the following months, dozens of Coho's residents reported similar sightings, always on clear winter nights, always following the same route between the Morrison mansion and the Winfield estate, always featuring the same passengers dressed in their wedding finery. The phenomenon established a pattern that would continue for decades, with each December bringing renewed manifestations of the phantom carriage. Local residents began referring to the apparition as the bridal coach, and many made pilgrimages to optimal viewing locations when atmospheric conditions seemed favorable for supernatural activity. Catherine herself lived for another 47 years, never marrying, never fully recovering from her grief, but also never acknowledging the supernatural manifestations that bore her likeness. When questioned about the phantom carriage, she would smile mysteriously and suggest that love strong enough to plan a life together might also be strong enough to transcend death's apparent finality. The historical Catherine Winfield died in 1908 at age 65, having devoted her life to charitable works and the education of young women. Her will established scholarships for promising female students, suggesting that her personal tragedy had inspired commitment to helping others achieve fulfillment that had been denied to her. The phantom carriage manifestations adapted to changing technology and social conditions while retaining their essential romantic character. Early automobile owners reported that their vehicles would mysteriously stall when the apparition appeared, as if modern mechanical devices could not function in the presence of supernatural phenomena. Railroad engineers working the line that paralleled the river road described whistle echoes that seemed to answer their signals, though no visible train could account for the responses. During the Great Depression, when many Coho's mills closed and economic hardship struck the region severely, phantom carriage sightings increased dramatically. Local folklore suggested that the spirits of Thomas and Catherine were attempting to provide comfort to a community facing its own form of tragedy, demonstrating that love could persist even when material circumstances seemed hopeless. World War II brought new significance to the legend as local families sent sons to combat, understanding for the first time the fears that had haunted Catherine during her final weeks of earthly happiness. Military wives reported feeling special connection to the phantom bride, whose eternal wait for her beloved reflected their own anxieties about husbands who might never return from foreign battlefields. Modern investigations of the phantom carriage phenomenon have yielded intriguing results that suggest genuine paranormal activity rather than mere folklore persistence. Electromagnetic monitoring equipment placed along the traditional route has recorded anomalous readings that coincide with witness reports of supernatural manifestations. Temperature variations, atmospheric pressure changes, and other measurable phenomena occur with statistical significance that exceeds random probability. Photography and video recording have produced ambiguous results. Some equipment malfunctions during reported sightings, while other devices capture images that show unexplained light patterns or shadows that roughly correspond to carriage dimensions. However, no definitive visual documentation has been obtained that would satisfy skeptical scientific analysis. The psychological implications of the phantom carriage legend extend beyond simple romantic tragedy into deeper questions about consciousness and its relationship to physical existence. The apparition suggests that emotional bonds may create energy patterns that persist beyond bodily death, that intense love can generate sufficient psychic force to manifest recognizable phenomena in the physical world. The consistent appearance of both Thomas and Catherine in the phantom carriage, despite Catherine's continued earthly existence during early manifestations, implies that consciousness may be capable of existing simultaneously in multiple states or dimensions. This aspect of the phenomenon challenges conventional assumptions about the boundary between life and death, suggesting that separation between these states may be less absolute than typically assumed. Environmental factors at Cohoes Falls continue to generate scientific interest among researchers studying the relationship between geological conditions and paranormal activity. The combination of flowing water, electromagnetic fields generated by industrial equipment, and unusual mineral compositions in the local bedrock creates conditions that some theorists believe may enhance psychic phenomena or provide energy sources for supernatural manifestations. Contemporary witnesses to phantom carriage appearances describe experiences that follow patterns established in the original 19th century accounts. The sound of approaching horses and wheels on cobblestones, the sight of an elegant carriage drawn by grey horses that cast no shadows, the glimpse of passengers dressed in period clothing who radiate happiness despite their tragic circumstances. But modern sightings also include details adapted to contemporary circumstances. The phantom carriage sometimes appears to pause at locations where traffic lights now regulate vehicle flow, as if supernatural intelligence recognizes changes in road conditions. Cellular phone service frequently fails in areas where the apparition manifests, suggesting electromagnetic interference associated with paranormal activity. The legend has become central to Cohoes' cultural identity and tourism promotion, with the city sponsoring annual events that celebrate both the historical significance and supernatural aspects of the phantom carriage story. Ghost tours, historical reenactments, and paranormal investigation workshops draw visitors from throughout the Northeast, generating economic benefits that help sustain the community where Thomas and Catherine's love story unfolded. The enduring appeal of the phantom carriage legend reflects universal human desires for love that transcends mortality, for beauty that persists beyond tragedy, and for evidence that death may not represent ultimate separation from those we cherish most deeply. Thomas and Catherine's eternal journey offers comfort to anyone who has experienced loss, suggesting that some bonds remain active even when physical presence becomes impossible. Tonight, as winter winds carry snow across familiar landscapes and carriage wheels might echo on frozen ground, remember that some love stories refuse to accept tragedy as conclusion. The phantom carriage of Cohoes Falls continues its supernatural route, carrying passengers whose wedding was interrupted, but whose devotion found ways to celebrate despite death's apparent victory. For love of sufficient intensity creates its own reality, writes its own laws, and insists on fulfillment even when earthly circumstances seem to prevent such resolution. The bridal coach reminds us that some promises transcend physical limitations, that some journeys continue long after their original destination becomes unreachable, and that death itself may be merely detour rather than destination for souls that refuse to accept separation as final. The Mothman of Point, Pleasant, herald of disaster. In the cold, dark hollows of West Virginia, where the Ohio River winds through landscapes shaped by industry and haunted by economic collapse, there emerged in 1966 a creature so alien, so inexplicable, that its very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. The Mothman of Point Pleasant was no traditional ghost or folklore phantom, but something altogether more disturbing, a harbinger of catastrophe whose appearances seemed to predict disasters with mathematical precision, whose presence suggested that non-human intelligences might be monitoring human affairs for purposes beyond mortal comprehension. Picture Point Pleasant in the autumn of 1966, a small river town struggling with the economic transition from coal mining to uncertain post-industrial future. The TNT area, a sprawling complex of abandoned World War II munitions bunkers, lay like a concrete scar across the landscape north of town. 2,500 acres of empty structures that had once produced explosives for the global conflict, but now served only as reminder of purposes that history had outgrown. It was in this desolate setting, among the crumbling remnants of America's military-industrial might, that something impossible chose to make its presence known to a world that had convinced itself that such things could not exist. The first encounter occurred on November 12th, 1966, when 5 men digging a grave in Clendenin Cemetery reported seeing a brown-winged humanoid creature rise from nearby trees and glide silently over their heads. The men, practical, reliable members of the community, described a being approximately 6 feet tall, with wings that spanned at least 10 feet, moving with purpose and intelligence that differentiated it from any known bird or aircraft. This initial sighting established patterns that would remain consistent throughout subsequent encounters. The creature's humanoid proportions, its extraordinary wingspan, its silent flight capabilities, and most significantly, its apparent awareness of human observers, combined with complete indifference to their presence. But it was the encounter 3 days later that would catapult Point Pleasant into national headlines and establish the Mothman legend in American supernatural folklore. Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Mallet, were driving through the TNT area late on November 15th, when their headlights illuminated something that challenged every assumption they held about the natural world. According to their detailed testimony provided to local police and subsequently documented by investigative journalist John Keel, the creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, with wings folded against a muscular humanoid torso. Its skin appeared grey or brown in the artificial light, but its most striking feature was its eyes. Enormous, red, hypnotically brilliant orbs that seemed to emit their own illumination rather than merely reflecting external light sources. The Mothman regarded the terrified couples for several moments, its alien intelligence apparently evaluating their presence before taking action. When it moved, the creature demonstrated capabilities that defied both aerodynamics and physics as conventionally understood. It unfolded wings of impossible proportions and lifted vertically into the air without visible effort, achieving flight through mechanisms that bore no resemblance to avian locomotion. What followed was a pursuit that would haunt the witnesses for the remainder of their lives. The Mothman flew directly ahead of their speeding automobile, maintaining position approximately 20 feet above the road surface while keeping pace with a vehicle traveling at over 100 miles per hour. The creature's flight remained perfectly steady, despite wind conditions that should have made such precision impossible for any living being. Most disturbing was the Mothman's apparent ability to anticipate the car's movements. When the driver attempted evasive maneuvers, the creature adjusted its course before the vehicle changed direction, suggesting either prescient abilities or sensory capabilities far exceeding human perception. The red eyes remained fixed on the car's occupants throughout the chase, conveying intelligence that was undeniably aware but utterly alien in its nature. The pursuit continued until the couples reached Point Pleasant's city limits, where the Mothman suddenly accelerated vertically and disappeared into the darkness above the Ohio River. The witnesses arrived at the local sheriff's department in a state of shock so profound that deputies initially suspected drug or alcohol intoxication, but medical examination revealed no evidence of substance abuse, and the consistency of their individual accounts suggested genuine trauma rather than fabricated story. Deputy Millard Halstead, a skeptical law enforcement professional with decades of experience distinguishing between reliable and unreliable witnesses, found the couple's testimony sufficiently credible to warrant official investigation. When he returned to the TNT area with the witnesses later that night, his police radio emitted strange interference patterns that prevented normal communication, and his police dog exhibited extreme agitation that persisted for days afterward. The official police report filed by Deputy Halstead documents these anomalous effects, providing governmental verification for at least some aspects of the supernatural encounter. Similar electromagnetic disturbances would be reported in connection with subsequent Mothman sightings throughout the Point Pleasant area. Word of the encounter spread rapidly through the close-knit community, generating both ridicule and additional witness reports. Over the following months, dozens of Point Pleasant residents described similar encounters with the red-eyed creature, establishing patterns that suggested systematic observation of the town and its inhabitants rather than random supernatural manifestations. The Mothman appeared most frequently in areas associated with the town's industrial infrastructure, near chemical plants, around the Silver Bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, and especially in the abandoned TNT bunkers where shadows and concrete provided camouflage for a being that seemed to prefer darkness. Witnesses consistently described the same physical characteristics: imposing height, powerful wings, grey or brown coloration, and most memorably, those enormous red eyes that seemed to peer directly into human souls. But the Mothman phenomenon extended beyond mere physical sightings into more disturbing psychological territory. Many witnesses reported receiving strange phone calls following their encounters, conversations with entities that seemed to possess detailed knowledge about their personal lives while speaking in mechanical voices that suggested non-human origin. These communications often included predictions about future events, particularly disasters or tragedies that would affect the Point Pleasant community. The psychological impact on witnesses was immediate and lasting. Many developed insomnia, describing persistent feelings of being watched by unseen intelligence. Others reported precognitive dreams, featuring disasters that would subsequently occur with disturbing accuracy. Some witnesses claimed to have developed telepathic abilities or enhanced intuitive awareness that allowed them to sense danger before it manifested physically. These psychological effects represent significant departures from typical ghost encounter symptoms, suggesting that the Mothman phenomenon involves forces or intelligences that operate according to principles fundamentally different from traditional supernatural entities. The scientific community's response to Mothman reports ranged from dismissive skepticism to serious investigation by researchers willing to consider possibilities beyond conventional zoological knowledge. Dr. Robert Smith, an ornithologist at West Virginia University, examined witness accounts and concluded that no known bird species could account for the reported physical characteristics and flight capabilities. Wildlife experts noted that the creature's described proportions, particularly the relationship between body mass and wing surface area, should have made sustained flight impossible according to conventional aerodynamic principles. The silent flight capability, combined with the enormous red eyes, suggested either evolutionary adaptations unknown to science or technology that exceeded current human capabilities. Environmental factors in the Point Pleasant area provided context that some researchers found significant. The abandoned TNT bunkers contained residual chemical contamination from wartime munitions production. The Ohio River carried industrial pollutants from upstream manufacturing centers. Some theorists propose that these environmental conditions might have triggered genetic mutations in native wildlife, creating creatures that combined familiar and alien characteristics. However, mutation theories failed to explain the Mothman's apparent intelligence, its precognitive abilities, or the electromagnetic anomalies associated with its appearances. Most scientists who studied the phenomenon concluded that conventional biological explanations were inadequate to account for the documented characteristics. The Mothman's significance became tragically clear on December 15, 1967, when the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed during evening rush hour traffic. 46 people died in the disaster, crushed by falling steel or drowned in the icy Ohio River waters. The bridge failure was attributed to metal fatigue in a single critical structural component, but the timing and location of the catastrophe gave new meaning to 13 months of Mothman sightings. Witnesses who had encountered the creature reported that their experiences had been accompanied by premonitions of impending disaster, vague but persistent feelings that something terrible would soon befall their community. The Mothman's frequent appearances near the Silver Bridge took on ominous significance in retrospect, suggesting that the entity had been monitoring a structure whose failure it somehow anticipated. The correlation between Mothman sightings and the Silver Bridge collapse established the creature's reputation as harbinger of disaster, though causal relationships remain speculative rather than proven. Similar patterns of unusual animal behavior preceding natural disasters have been documented worldwide, suggesting that some non-human intelligences may possess early warning capabilities that exceed human detection methods. Following the bridge collapse, Mothman encounters in Point Pleasant decreased dramatically, as if the entity's purpose in the area had been fulfilled by the disaster it seemed to have predicted. This pattern reinforced interpretation of the creature as herald rather than cause of catastrophe. A supernatural intelligence that appears to observe and warn rather than directly intervene in human affairs. The psychological impact of the Mothman phenomenon on Point Pleasant extended far beyond individual witness trauma into collective community consciousness. The creature became symbol of environmental degradation, economic decline, and social uncertainty that characterized the region during the 1960s. Its alien nature reflected residents' sense of alienation from forces beyond their control that were reshaping their world in unwelcome directions. Modern Mothman research has employed sophisticated technology to investigate ongoing reports of similar creatures in various locations throughout North America. Electromagnetic monitoring equipment, infrared cameras, and other detection devices have recorded anomalous readings in areas where witnesses report encounters, but definitive visual documentation remains elusive. The creature has become cultural icon, inspiring films, books, and annual festivals that celebrate Point Pleasant's connection to one of America's most famous cryptid encounters. Tourism related to the Mothman legend generates significant economic benefits for the community, transforming supernatural terror into commercial opportunity. Contemporary interpretations of the Mothman phenomenon range from extraterrestrial hypotheses to interdimensional theories to advanced military technology explanations. Each theoretical framework attempts to account for the creature's extraordinary capabilities, while addressing the intelligence and purpose that seem to motivate its appearances. The extraterrestrial hypothesis proposes that Mothman represents surveillance technology deployed by non-human intelligence to monitor human civilization, particularly during periods of crisis or technological transition. The creature's apparent ability to predict disasters might reflect access to information sources or analytical capabilities that exceed human scientific understanding. Interdimensional theories suggest that Mothman originates from parallel realities or alternate dimensions that occasionally intersect with our own space-time continuum. The creature's alien characteristics and supernatural abilities would result from evolutionary processes operating under physical laws different from those governing our universe. Military technology explanations focus on the timing of Mothman appearances during the Cold War era, when classified research projects explored advanced aircraft designs, psychological warfare techniques, and surveillance capabilities. Some theorists propose that the creature represents experimental technology that exceeded official disclosure parameters. None of these theoretical frameworks has gained universal acceptance among serious researchers, and the Mothman phenomenon remains genuinely anomalous by contemporary scientific standards. The consistency of witness accounts combined with measurable physical effects suggests that something objectively real underlies the legend, even if that reality challenges conventional understanding. Tonight, as you contemplate the possibilities that dwell beyond the boundaries of accepted knowledge, remember that the Mothman represents more than regional folklore or cryptid mythology. Its appearances suggest that non-human intelligences may be monitoring human civilization, that some entities possess capabilities for predicting disaster that exceed our scientific understanding, and that the universe may contain forms of consciousness that operate according to principles we have not yet learned to recognize or comprehend. The red eyes that peered into human souls from West Virginia darkness continue to watch from locations unknown, continue to serve purposes that transcend mortal understanding, continue to herald disasters that human wisdom cannot prevent. For the Mothman reminds us that we share this reality with intelligences whose nature and intentions remain as mysterious today as they were during that terrifying autumn when Point Pleasant learned that some truths are too large and alien for human minds to fully grasp. Somewhere in the darkness beyond our campfire's light, wings might be unfolding, red eyes might be watching, and harbingers of change might be preparing to deliver messages that we lack the wisdom to understand until after their warnings have proven tragically accurate. And so our journey through the shadowed landscapes of American supernatural tradition draws toward its close, though the echoes of these ancient terrors will continue reverberating through the corridors of memory long after the final ember fades to ash. We have walked together through fog-shrouded highways where phantom hitchhikers seek eternal rides home, through lovers' lanes where malevolent figures with hooks for hands prey upon young romance, beside rivers where weeping women search for children they destroyed in moments of desperation. We have witnessed the protective presence of the Grey Man as he shields the faithful from nature's fury, trembled before the calculated malevolence of the Bell Witch as she systematically destroyed an innocent family, and marveled at the phantom carriage that carries lovers whose wedding was interrupted by death, but whose devotion found ways to celebrate beyond the grave. Finally, we have confronted the alien intelligence of the Mothman, that harbinger of disaster whose red eyes peer into human souls, while monitoring civilization for purposes we cannot comprehend. What wisdom have we gleaned from these encounters with America's campfire mythology? That our ancestors understood truths about the relationship between consciousness and reality that our technological civilization has forgotten at its peril. Each entity we have encountered serves as both mirror and teacher, reflecting aspects of the human condition while revealing forces that operate beyond the boundaries of material existence. These stories persist, not because earlier generations were more superstitious than ourselves, but because they encode genuine insights about the nature of love, guilt, justice, and consciousness that remain relevant regardless of scientific advancement. They remind us that some mysteries cannot be solved through technological analysis, that some truths emerge only in the space between rational thought and intuitive recognition. The phantom hitchhiker teaches us that love transcends death, that some journeys must be completed, even when their original destinations become unreachable. The Hookman warns that isolation invites danger, that the price of stepping outside protective boundaries may be higher than we imagine. La Llorona demonstrates that some guilt creates wounds that death cannot heal, that maternal love can transform into something monstrous when corrupted by desperation. The Grey Man shows us that not all supernatural entities seek to harm the living, that death sometimes enables service to others in ways that life could not accommodate. The Bell Witch reveals that genuine evil exists in forms that transcend human understanding, that some malevolence operates according to principles that moral philosophy cannot accommodate. The Phantom Carriage reminds us that true love creates its own reality, insists on celebration, even when circumstances seem to forbid such joy. The Mothman suggests that non-human intelligences may be monitoring human civilization, that consciousness may exist in forms that our science has not yet learned to recognize. Together, these legends form a comprehensive mythology that addresses fundamental questions about existence, death, love, justice, and the nature of reality itself. They serve as reminder that the universe contains mysteries larger than human comprehension, forces more complex than technological analysis can map, and intelligences that operate according to principles we are only beginning to glimpse. The campfire tradition that preserved these stories represents one of humanity's oldest educational methods, the transmission of essential wisdom through narrative structures that engage both intellectual and emotional understanding. Around fires like the one we have shared tonight, countless generations have gathered to explore the boundaries between known and unknown, to confront fears that daylight cannot banish, and to celebrate the mysterious forces that shape human destiny. These stories also demonstrate the distinctly American character of supernatural folklore that emerged from the collision between old world traditions and new world experiences. European ghost stories adapted to frontier conditions, Native American spiritual concepts merged with immigrant mythologies, and unique American fears of highways, technology, social isolation, and rapid change generated new forms of supernatural expression. The environmental settings of these tales, lonely roads, abandoned buildings, industrial wastelands, forgotten cemeteries, reflect the American experience of rapid development followed by equally rapid abandonment, the cycle of boom and bust that has characterized our national growth. These locations become haunted not just by individual spirits, but by the collective memory of dreams that failed, communities that dissolved, and ways of life that progress discarded. The psychological functions served by these campfire stories remain as relevant today as they were when our ancestors first gathered around frontier fires to share accounts of supernatural encounters. They provide frameworks for processing anxiety about death, change, loss, and the unknown. They offer community bonding through shared confrontation with universal fears. They preserve wisdom about dangerous situations while entertainment that makes the lessons memorable. In our current era of global communication and digital connectivity, the campfire tradition has evolved but not disappeared. Online communities share supernatural encounters through social media platforms. Paranormal investigators broadcast their findings to worldwide audiences, and streaming services deliver ghost stories to millions of viewers simultaneously. Yet the essential human need for gathering in intimate groups to confront mystery and fear through storytelling continues unchanged. The scientific revolution that promised to banish supernatural belief through rational explanation has instead revealed how much we still do not understand about consciousness, quantum mechanics, and the nature of reality itself. Modern physics describes a universe far stranger than any campfire story. A reality where observation changes outcome, where particles exist in multiple states simultaneously, where information travels faster than light through quantum entanglement. Perhaps our ancestors' acceptance of supernatural phenomena reflected intuitive understanding of principles that science is only now beginning to articulate. Their stories of consciousness surviving death, of love transcending physical limitations, of intelligence existing in non-human forms, may prove prophetic rather than primitive, as our knowledge expands to encompass realities that current paradigms cannot accommodate. The environmental crises that threaten contemporary civilization give new relevance to supernatural stories that warn about the consequences of severing connections between human activity and natural law. Climate change, pollution, mass extinction, and resource depletion all reflect humanity's failure to recognize limits that earlier generations understood instinctively. The supernatural entities in our campfire stories often serve as guardians of natural boundaries, protectors of sacred spaces, or vengeful spirits punishing those who violate environmental taboos. Their warnings, dismissed as superstition by industrial civilization, may contain wisdom essential for planetary survival in an age when technological power has exceeded moral development. As we face uncertain futures shaped by artificial intelligence, biotechnology, space exploration, and other developments that will transform human civilization beyond recognition, these ancient stories remind us that consciousness remains mysterious, that love and justice operate according to principles that transcend material calculation, and that the universe may contain forms of intelligence whose nature and purposes exceed our current ability to comprehend. The campfire around which we have gathered tonight, whether literal flame or metaphorical warmth, represents humanity's eternal need to seek meaning in darkness, to find community through shared exploration of mystery, and to preserve wisdom that transcends individual mortality through stories that successive generations can adapt to their own circumstances. If these tales have awakened recognition of forces that continue operating beneath the surface of modern life, if they have opened awareness to possibilities that rational materialism prefers to ignore, then our time together has served its ancient purpose. The stories will live on in your memory, adapting to your personal experiences while retaining their essential power to connect you with mysteries that unite all human consciousness. Share these stories with others who understand that some truths emerge only in the space between light and shadow, between the known and unknowable. Subscribe to our channel if you wish to continue exploring the darkness that surrounds all human pretense to complete knowledge. Leave comments sharing your own encounters with the inexplicable, your family's supernatural traditions, or your thoughts about the relationship between folklore and reality. The fire that has illuminated our gathering tonight will eventually fade, but the warmth of shared wonder will persist in hearts that remain open to mystery. The darkness that surrounds us holds secrets that future generations may solve, but also mysteries that may forever exceed human understanding. In that darkness, as our ancestors knew, dwell forces both terrible and wonderful that remind us of our place within cosmic hierarchies larger than individual comprehension. As you return to your daily lives, carry with you the recognition that reality contains layers of meaning that surface awareness rarely perceives. Pay attention to signs that suggest supernatural presence, unexplained sounds, atmospheric changes, sudden temperature variations, electronic device malfunctions, animal behavior that seems to warn of invisible dangers. Most importantly, remember that the best campfire stories are those that change us in the telling, that leave us more aware of mystery, more humble before the unknown, more connected to the eternal human quest for understanding that transcends the boundaries of individual mortality. The flames that have danced before us tonight carry forward light from fires that burned when the world was young, when magic and reality were one, when humans understood their kinship with forces that shaped the natural world. That light will continue burning in new fires, illuminating new stories, warming new communities of truth seekers who gather to explore the beautiful and terrible mysteries that define existence itself. Until we meet again, in the flickering shadows where stories live eternal lives. May your dreams be populated by productive terrors, and your waking hours enriched by recognition that you inhabit a universe far stranger and more wonderful than daylight reveals. The darkness holds many secrets yet to be unveiled, and the ancient tradition of gathering around fires to share encounters with the impossible will continue as long as human consciousness seeks meaning beyond the merely material. For in the end, these campfire stories survive because they serve as portals through time, connecting us with eternal aspects of human experience that transcend historical period, technological advancement, and cultural change. They remind us that we are part of something larger than individual existence, participants in ongoing dialogue between human consciousness and cosmic mystery that began with our species' first attempts to understand its place in the universe. The fire fades, the stories end, but the wonder continues. In every shadow, in every unexplained sound, in every moment when rational explanation falls short of experienced reality, the possibility remains that we might encounter forces that challenge everything we thought we knew about the nature of existence itself. Sleep well, dear listeners, and remember that the greatest stories are always those that leave room for possibility, that acknowledge the limitations of human knowledge while celebrating the courage to explore beyond those boundaries into territories where dragons still fly, and ancient wisdom waits patiently for hearts brave enough to listen to voices that speak from beyond the grave.